External Affairs Minister Jaishankar speaking there at the United Nations General Assembly, where he's in fact sent out a very clear message to Pakistan and China. To Pakistan on terror, saying there is a need to call out terror in all its forms, and secondary to China also, where the External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar has said that territorial integrity and respecting that is a must. Besides that, Dr. S. Jaishankar using the UNGA platform to talk about how India has in fact focused on the global south, a theme that you saw constantly also recurring in G20, something that the External Affairs Minister has also referred to at the UNGA. But a clear-cut message there being sent out to Pakistan on the issue of terror, and also a message to China on territorial integrity. He also in fact spoke very clearly about the issue of how there are several who are considered to be the gatekeepers also having to take responsibility. But very important speech this, and one that clearly sends out a message to other countries on how India is leading from the front in several issues, in several sectors. He used the word Vishwamitra as well, saying that is the role India has now taken in the global world order. Now on territorial integrity, there are 2 points here, and if you look at what exactly he said, he speaks about how territorial integrity can't be cherry-picked. And that seems to be a message that's also being sent across to Canada at a time when you have the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau accusing the Indian government of, in fact, having a role in a Khalistani terrorist killing but refusing to act on terror. So even as Dr. S. Jaishankar has used this platform to send out a message on terror, this is something that even Canada will be listening to very closely. The message is not just to Pakistan but also to Canada now, because this comes just days after India categorically said that Canada is a safe haven for terrorists. Words that were reserved for Pakistan were used for Canada. And it is in following with that that you have the External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar saying very clearly that territorial integrity, one, can't be cherry-picked, and second, that there must be a crackdown on terror irrespective. There can be no terms and conditions in such a circumstance. So interesting speech, this interesting address, loaded also with messaging to many of our neighbors, to countries like Canada, and also he's made a pitch about the Security Council, saying it's time to grow bigger, to include more countries, besides which he's also spoken on the G20 success on the global south, being the voice of the global south. I want to bring in right now Geeta Mohan on this broadcast. Geeta, in fact that 20-minute speech, there's clearly a message that Dr. Jaishankar sent out to the likes of Canada and China.
Well, absolutely. A few very important points over there. One paragraph significantly important for India when it comes to messaging to countries that have undermined India's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and have now started using terrorism as a tool, as a mechanism to squeeze India in. With regards to China, he spoke about sovereignty and territorial integrity. With regards to Pakistan, of course, terrorism and the support that comes from various institutions. But particularly when it comes to Canada, a real dig at Canada when it comes to political conveniences and using terror according to their political agenda. So a real attack on how countries have used such terror activities, anti-India activities to their advantage and against India's interests. So there is a huge and an important statement. The External Affairs Minister of India did not name any country, but presumably all those countries where these areas have been mentioned understand what he was trying to say. It's not just Canada, Akshita. It's also the other countries who have come out in support of Canada. Now we'll have to think about the statement that has been made on the floor of the United Nations General Assembly with regards to political agenda and furthering their political interests in order to move forward in their own domestic constituency, undermining India's sovereignty, territorial integrity, as also India's concerns with regards to terrorism.
I don't think this is subtle in any way, Geeta. Look at the kind of wording that's been used. It was very clear that Dr. Jaishankar used these words to send out a clear-cut message. When he says terror can't dictate political agenda, when he says territorial integrity cannot be cherry-picked, all of this you put this in context of what's happened in the last 1 week, and it's very clear who that message is intended for.
Absolutely. We were expecting a strong statement from the Indian side, and the External Affairs Minister has made it a very smart diplomatic statement, but in no uncertain terms, telling those countries that needed to hear this, that India's sovereignty, territorial integrity, concerns with regard to terrorism cannot be undermined, cannot be ignored. So that's a very strong statement coming in from India, particularly to do with countries like Pakistan, China, and now Canada. It's unfortunate, Akshita, because every year we discuss how India has taken up this matter at the United Nations, but the countries we'd mentioned were China and Pakistan. We've added Canada to that list in itself. It's quite unfortunate, but Canada will have to now maybe introspect and see whether if supporting these elements is really to their advantage, or for that matter, whether if they're actually going to look into the concerns India has. These are no longer peaceful protests. There have been calls and threats against Indian diplomats. There have been attacks on diplomatic missions. There have been calls on political assassinations by certain Khalistani elements. We are not going to name them. Again, a time for Canada to introspect. In moments from now, the Canadian Foreign Minister will also be addressing the United Nations General Assembly. There have been no names taken, so we are not going to expect a right of reply. But should Canada think that there was a statement directed towards them, there could be a right of reply that Canada might exercise later on, as does Pakistan every time India raises the issue of terrorism in the neighborhood, especially when cross-border terrorism is mentioned. This time around, Dr. Jaishankar did not mention cross-border terrorism.
All right, Geeta, thanks very much for getting us some of those highlights. Hard-hitting speech there by the External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, in context of what's been happening with Canada. The message to the country is very clear, to Prime Minister Trudeau is very clear. He says that you can't cherry-pick the term territorial integrity, you can't choose to use it when convenient and then choose to ignore it when not.